Jakovina and Pavlaković for speaking to us. Pavlaković is a professor of cultural studies from the University of Rijeka, and Dr. Jakovina is a professor for contemporary history at the University of Zagreb. And both of you were presenting here at the conference, and both of you focusing on the Croatian case study of remembering or not remembering World War One. And I was wondering whether you could elaborate a bit more on this, so to say, Croatian silence of the centennial in comparison to other countries in the region.
You go.
Okay, well, I focused mostly on the visual aspect of it and why there aren't so many memorials to the First World War, unlike the other neighboring countries and also in Western Europe. So I was really focusing on the lack of the emptiness in the space, and of course that is one reason is Croatia was on the losing side of the war, and certainly as part of the nation building project for the new Yugoslavia, which was building its own monuments. So in Serbia you saw quite a few of the memorials, and also because the war was fought on Serbian territory, and it was unlikely that these war memorials were going to be built on Croatia to the army that had been fighting Serbia and had been fighting basically the creation of the Yugoslav state. There are some military cemeteries, and what I was looking at also was the building of some new memorials, and it's a particular association that has initiated a few of these World War I memorials in the last 10 years.
Yeah, there are some in Zagreb, and there are some plans to put plaques at least on, I don't know, what used to be where soldiers used to be, and some hospitals, and there are even some schools which did a couple of things connected with World War One. There are going to be two conferences, one at the Institute of History and the other one with my department and city of Zagreb on Zagreb in the Great War. And it all started in Zagreb with something that deserves, I guess, to be mentioned, that foreign embassies or cultural centers of different embassies in Zagreb organized a conference that was very international, with probably the best historians in the world right now dealing with the Great War, but that somehow was not connected with Croatian historiography, though some Croatian historians also participated at that one. But otherwise, I mean, although Croatian state, like so many European states, formed a special committee, nota bene nobody from University of Zagreb Faculty of Philosophy is included in that one. Although the governmental body was formed, when you compare, I guess, Croatia to almost any other European country touched by the Great War, we have done hardly anything, or very few things worth mentioning. But that is somehow very normal if you look at Croatian historiography and our historiographical tradition, or books dealing with the Great War. Hardly any.
Okay. Well, Geran was sort of mentioning that it's hard to formulate a narrative, or harder for governmental bodies and intellectuals, etc., to formulate a narrative about a war that wasn't fought on your own territory, or a war that has been lost. So is that maybe one of the reasons why, could you elaborate a bit more on that, for the reasons that Croatian historiography hasn't dealt with the Great War in such details?
Yeah, well, the war was lost. Then, and what Geran explained, it's in a way awkward to what to mention. To mention Borojević wouldn't make any sense. He died in Vienna. He was a winning commander of armies that were fighting against the winning side in the Great War. So there was hardly anything on that. Plus, Second World War followed 20 years later, and that event became much more defining for former Yugoslavia than the Great War. So very few things, but I think that during the Yugoslav period, as well as during the period in between two world wars, there is a visible difference of different parts of Yugoslavia. So in Serbia today, in Serbia in the 60s and 80s, there were many more things, more books, more fiction, movies, everything dedicated to the Great War. While in Croatia, I think that you, without Krleža, who is our writer number one, and Tito's role in the Great War, and then everybody was talking about Tito, of course, so that part was there, you know, how he fought on the Eastern Front and this and that. At the same time, his Serbian period was totally omitted from his biography. That's, I guess, the only thing that in Croatia we actually have in mind. You know, when you say the Great War, without Croatia there wouldn't be anything.
Well, I think also after World War I, the way that was commemorated in most other countries, it was all these men had fallen for the nation. And so, again, for Croatia was having been part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and then becoming part of this new Yugoslav state, it was really difficult to commemorate them in that way. Whereas Serbia, of course, did use the sacrifice of all the soldiers and the civilians during the war as also the base for this new Yugoslav state that they had created. You know, we sacrificed the most for Yugoslavia.
And sort of as a wrap-up question as well, throughout the conference we've heard many of the presenters and papers talking about not similarities but parallels of the situation that Europe was in just on the eve of 1914, so 1912, 1913, and the situation Europe is right now. So that if you have stronger geopolitical polarization, you've got new wars in Ukraine, etc., and so on and so on. And does this forgetting of World War One, sort of in the Croatian case, does this represent in any way a more productive, or not to say productive, but better dealing with World War One if we compare it to the situation in Serbia, where you had a nationalist backlash concerning Princip and so on and so forth?
Well, I think because it isn't so politicized, maybe it is more in the realm of historians, and you can like analyze these things with a clearer head. But for one example is that even the number of casualties is unknown, and you know these are this is archival work. This is really just rigorous work that needs to be done, but without the kind of passions I think we've seen elsewhere. So I think looking forward to these conferences and what kind of debates there can be about that.
Yeah, we can only hope that these conferences and overall interest in Europe will force Croatian historians to do something that's been done in many countries decades ago. If that's going to be resolved, then that will be great. But I'm not really 100% sure that we will know the exact number of casualties, you know. And if you're talking about politicization of historical topics, we are anyhow interested in just few from the second half or from mid 20th century, and that's more than enough. You know, that's more than our share of politicized history.
And I think, as I mentioned in my presentation, you know, World War I is not remembered as the end of the war, but the beginning of Yugoslavia. And I think that's what really was because of the Croatian state building project as well. That was what everybody was focusing on.
So yeah, wait for 2018, then you will see a politicization of history in Croatia.
Okay, and on that note, I'd like to thank both of you for agreeing to talk to us, and hope you have a pleasant stay in Graz, and hope to see you soon again. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.